They laughed right in the old cook's face and said, "You'll teach us discipline," like he was a joke wearing an apron, never imagining the entire base would soon go silent because of him. Keep listening, and which city are you listening from? And if you enjoy the story, please subscribe for more. The mess hall at Fort Bracken came alive before sunrise, long before the parade ground filled and long before the first formation whistle. And in that fluorescent-lit kitchen, the elderly American man moved with a calm rhythm that made the young soldiers overlook him completely. White beard trimmed, faded red shirt under a stained apron, blue jeans, worn boots that didn't squeak on the tile because they were broken, in the way hard lives break things in. He was just Cook Hayes to them, the guy who portioned eggs, corrected trays, and wiped counters with a focus so quiet it almost irritated people who needed attention to feel important. That morning, a platoon of recruits and junior soldiers poured into the dining facility after a brutal PT session, sweat drying in patches on their uniforms. Laughter too loud for the hour, ego still buzzing because they'd survived another smoke session and felt invincible for it. They slammed trays down, complained about powdered eggs, and acted like the mess hall belonged to them simply because they wore the uniform today. Hayes watched them the way you watch storm clouds, without fear, without excitement, just alert. One kid, barely out of training, fresh haircut, voice full of confidence he hadn't earned, snatched an extra sausage link from the line and smirked when the line server frowned. "Relax," he said, loud enough for his buddies to hear. "We're the ones doing the real work." Another soldier bumped the drink station, spilling water across the floor, then stepped right through it as if it was someone else's problem. Hayes didn't bark, he didn't lecture. He reached for the mop like it was normal for respect to leak out of rooms the way water did, but the spill spread toward a power strip under a counter, one of those little hazards that looks harmless until it isn't, and Hayes's voice when it came was steady and low. "Watch the water," he said. "That'll get someone hurt." The recruits barely looked up. The loud one rolled his eyes. "Yeah, and you'll teach us safety too," he scoffed, glancing at the apron. "What's next, Grandpa? Discipline?" A few laughed, harsh and sharp, the kind of laughter that tries to make a person small so you don't have to feel small yourself. Hayes kept mopping, eyes on the spreading puddle, posture relaxed but precise. "I'm not trying to teach you anything," he said softly. "Just trying to keep you from learning the hard way." That should have ended it. It didn't. The loud recruit leaned closer, emboldened by the audience. "You hear that?" he said to his friends, pointing at Hayes like he was entertainment. "Old Cook thinks he can tell us what to do. You gonna smoke us next? Make us do push-ups by the salad bar?" Laughter erupted again. A couple of soldiers joined in, banging trays, mocking the old man's calm tone, mimicking him. "Just trying to keep you safe, son, like kindness was weakness." Hayes's eyes lifted for a moment, not angry, not hurt, just tired in a way that suggested he'd heard worse in worse places. "Clean up your spill," he said, still quiet, "and take what you're issued, not what you can grab." The loud recruit's smile turned mean. "Or what?" he snapped. "You'll write me up, you'll call my squad leader, you're a cook, you serve food, that's it." He leaned in and delivered the line like a punch meant to land in front of witnesses. "You'll teach us discipline." Who are you to teach soldiers anything? The room around them kept moving, trays sliding, boots shuffling, utensils clinking, but a few heads turned, drawn to the heat of the moment. A young specialist behind the recruit smirked, enjoying the show. Another soldier, older than the rest, didn't smile at all. He watched Hayes's hands, the way they didn't shake, the way they moved like a man who'd learned control when everything else was chaos. Hayes set the mop down carefully, not in surrender but in restraint, and he looked at the recruit long enough for the laughter to thin. "I'm nobody," he said, voice flat with humility. "Just the guy trying to feed you, but discipline isn't something you put on with a uniform. It's what you do when nobody's watching." The recruit scoffed like that was corny. "Save the speech," he said. "Stick to cooking." He turned away, triumph on his face, and took another sausage link. Hayes didn't stop him. He just reached under the counter and quietly unplugged the power strip before the water could reach it, preventing a shock none of the young soldiers would have seen coming. Then he resumed mopping. No drama, no threat, no "I told you so." But something had already been set in motion. The kind of thing arrogance never notices until the moment it's too late, because at the far end of the DFAC, a door opened and in walked senior leadership for a surprise standards check. Crisp uniforms, serious faces, boots that didn't belong in a kitchen unless something was about to change. And the first thing the command sergeant major saw wasn't the trays or the line or the recruits. It was the old cook in the faded red shirt, quietly controlling chaos without asking for credit. The recruits kept laughing, because youth always mistakes the absence of reaction for weakness, and as the senior leaders moved deeper into the DFAC, silent, watchful, not announcing themselves, the loud recruit doubled down, determined to squeeze one more joke out of the old man while he still had an audience. He nudged his buddy and nodded toward Hayes. "Watch this," he said, then called out across the line. "Hey, Cook, since you're big on discipline, tell us how to be soldiers, yeah." A few snickers flared again, and even some tired junior NCOs smiled reflexively, not fully paying attention to what they were endorsing because it felt harmless in the moment, just a young soldier clowning on a worker. Hayes didn't bite. He kept mopping, eyes on the floor, body angled slightly so he didn't block the line. "Eat your food," he said quietly. "Drink water, stay off the slick tile." The recruit laughed louder, hearing only what he wanted to hear. "Hear that? He's issuing orders now." He raised his voice like a comedian working a room. "You got a rank in that apron, old man. You got a tab on that spatula," his friends howled. One of them, trying to impress the loud one, scooped a handful of napkins and tossed them onto the wet floor like confetti. "Clean that up too, chef," he said, mockingly stressing the word chef like an insult. Hayes stared at the napkins for a beat, then bent down slowly and picked them up, one at a time, not because he was defeated, but because he refused to let their childishness endanger someone else. The loud recruit watched him do it and shook his head with theatrical pity. "Man," he said, "imagine being that old and still taking orders from kids." That line made a couple of soldiers laugh in a way that sounded uglier than the first jokes, and it drew the attention of a staff sergeant nearby who should have shut it down but didn't, because the staff sergeant was tired, because it was early, because it was easier to let it slide than to correct it, and that's how standards die, not in explosions but in silence. Hayes straightened with the napkins in hand and glanced toward the recruits. "You don't have to be cruel," he said softly. "Cruelty isn't strength." The loud recruit's face tightened. "Don't preach at me," he snapped. "You're not my NCO." He leaned closer, lowering his voice just enough to feel threatening. "You're a civilian in a kitchen. Stay in your lane." Hayes met his eyes without flinching. "I'm in my lane," he said. "I'm keeping you alive." The recruit scoffed. "Alive from what bad pancakes?" He turned to his friends and announced, "This dude thinks he's saving lives with oatmeal." More laughter. Someone in the back of the line whispered, "Stolen Valor vibes," and another muttered, "Probably wears medals to the grocery store." Hayes heard that too, and for the first time his jaw tightened, not in anger, but in something older, memory pressing against the ribs. He didn't argue. He just reached into his apron pocket and pulled out a small folded cloth, wiping his hands clean with deliberate care, as if preparing for something. The recruits misread it as weakness, as surrender. "Oh," the loud one mocked, "he's gonna cry." Then he did the one thing that turned the room. He grabbed Hayes's apron strap lightly, not to rip it off, just to tug it, a small humiliation meant for laughs. "What's your call sign, chef?" he said, grinning. "Spoon." A few soldiers laughed too loudly again, and that sound carried farther than the recruit realized. Carried toward the senior leadership walking the far aisle with silent focus. Carried into the hearing range of the command sergeant major, whose eyes had been scanning the facility for standards, discipline, respect, and who now stopped moving entirely, because he'd heard the tone, the words, the casual disrespect directed at a man who was supposed to be safe in the background. The command sergeant major's gaze cut through the room like a searchlight, landing first on the loud recruit, then on Hayes. Something changed in his face, something tightening, something dawning, and he started walking faster than a senior enlisted leader ever needs to, boots striking the tile with purpose. Nearby, a first sergeant noticed the change and followed his gaze, and his own expression shifted from curiosity to alarm, because he recognized Hayes too, not from the kitchen, but from stories told in hushed voices about a man who once held standards like steel and didn't bend for anyone. The recruit, oblivious, still had his hand near Hayes's apron strap, still smiling like he was in control. Hayes gently lifted the recruit's hand off him without force, like removing a child's fingers from a hot stove. "Don't," he said quietly. The recruit's smile faltered for half a second. "Or what?" he challenged again, louder now, trying to reclaim the room. "You'll teach me discipline." That was the moment the command sergeant major reached the edge of the serving line, his presence sudden and absolute, and the chatter around the DFAC began to die. Not because someone ordered it, but because every soldier felt the pressure of real authority entering the space. The command sergeant major didn't shout. He didn't have to. His silence was the kind that made grown men check their posture without thinking. And as he stepped closer, the casual laughter drained out of the DFAC like air escaping a punctured tire, leaving only clinks of utensils and the soft squeak of boots on tile. And the loud recruit finally noticed the shift too late. turning halfway with a confused grin that died as soon as he recognized the command sergeant major's face. At ease, someone started to say automatically, but the command sergeant major lifted a hand and the words strangled in the air. Because he wasn't here for formalities, he was here for the thing happening in front of him, and his eyes stayed fixed on Hayes, on the old cook in the faded red shirt and apron. Like he was seeing an old photograph step off a wall and breathe. The recruit swallowed, suddenly aware that his earlier tone had witnesses who mattered, and he snapped into a stiff posture, eyes forward, trying to look disciplined now that discipline had arrived, while Hayes simply stood there with the mop handle in one hand, expression neutral, as if this was not his moment and he didn't want it to be. The command sergeant major stopped a few feet away and looked from Hayes to the recruits and back again. "What's going on here?" he asked, voice low, controlled, not angry yet, worse than angry, disappointed. The loud recruit opened his mouth quickly, eager to fill the silence with excuses. "Nothing, Sergeant Major, just messing around." "Stop," the command sergeant major said, one word, and the recruit's voice died. The command sergeant major's gaze returned to Hayes. "Sir," he said, and that single word hit the room like a dropped tray, "sir," because no one called the cook sir, and a few soldiers felt their stomachs twist as they realized the command sergeant major was not speaking casually. Hayes's eyes lifted slightly. "Morning," he replied. The command sergeant major didn't respond to the greeting. His face was tight, fighting something behind the eyes. He looked at Hayes's apron, the mop, the wet floor, then back at the recruits. "Who touched him?" he asked quietly. No one answered. The loud recruit's throat worked. "Sergeant Major, I didn't." "Who?" the command sergeant major repeated, voice slightly sharper now. "Put hands on him." A younger soldier, not the loud one, glanced at Hayes and then down at his own boots, shame flickering. "It was him," he admitted, nodding toward the loud recruit. The loud recruit snapped his head toward him like betrayal. "Bro," the command sergeant major cut through it. "You thought it was funny," he said to the loud recruit, "to mock an old man doing his job." The recruit tried to stand taller. "Sergeant Major, I didn't know." "You didn't know what?" the command sergeant major asked, and the question was so calm it felt dangerous. "You didn't know he mattered." The recruit's face reddened. "Sergeant Major, he's a cook. I mean." The sentence died as soon as it left his mouth, because even he heard how ugly it sounded now. The command sergeant major stared at him for a long second. Then he turned to Hayes again, voice lowering. "Sir, are you all right?" Hayes nodded once like he didn't want to feed the fire. "I'm fine," he said. "They're young." The command sergeant major's jaw clenched, because that wasn't an excuse. It was mercy, and mercy from someone you've wronged feels like a weight you don't know how to lift. The command sergeant major looked around at the DFAC, at the watching soldiers, at the recruits who suddenly realized their jokes were now part of official memory. "Kitchen," he said to a nearby staff sergeant, "cut the power to the serving line." "Now," the staff sergeant hesitated, confused. "Sergeant Major." "Now," the command sergeant major repeated, and the staff sergeant moved. A moment later, the lights over the serving line flickered and went dark, machines humming down, warming lamps clicking off, the sudden change turning the DFAC into a different kind of room, a room where comfort and routine were gone, where attention sharpened. "Nobody eats," the command sergeant major said, voice carrying, "until we fix this." Soldiers froze with trays half filled. The loud recruit's mouth went dry. "Sergeant Major, please. You wanted a lesson on discipline," the command sergeant major said, eyes hard. "Congratulations, class is in session." Then he turned back to Hayes, voice quieter, respectful again. "Sir," he said, "I need you with me." Hayes hesitated, his eyes flicking across the recruits, boys who looked suddenly smaller than they had a minute ago, and he murmured, "I don't want trouble." The command sergeant major shook his head slightly. "Trouble already happened," he said. "Now we correct it." Behind them, senior leaders were gathering, drawn by the unnatural silence and the power cut, and the DFAC, normally loud with talk, had become so quiet you could hear a single utensil drop. Whatever name, whatever history sat behind Cook Hayes, the base was about to remember it out loud. The command sergeant major stepped to the center of the DFAC like it was a parade ground, and the way the room responded, spines straightening, chatter evaporating, every eye forward, proved that discipline, real discipline, didn't need a speech. It just needed the right presence, and when he spoke again, his voice carried cleanly through the silence. "Attention," he ordered, and even the soldiers mid-bite froze, trays lowering as boots shifted into instinctive readiness, because something in his tone said this wasn't about food anymore. Then he turned to the old cook beside the serving line, the one in the faded red shirt and apron, and said the words that changed the air in one breath. "Sergeant Major Daniel Hayes, United States Army, retired." A wave of shock rolled through the DFAC, visible, physical, as faces changed in real time, because Sergeant Major didn't belong next to an apron in their minds, and yet there it was, spoken by the base's senior enlisted leader with undeniable certainty. The loud recruit went pale, a cold sweat forming at his hairline as he stared at the old man he'd mocked, trying to reconcile the calm voice and worn boots with the rank that had just been placed on him like a crown he never asked to wear. The command sergeant major continued, eyes on the recruits. "You laughed at him," he said. "You questioned him. You put hands on him." His voice dropped. "Do you know who you touched?" No one spoke. Even the most confident soldiers looked like their throats had sealed shut. Hayes tried to shrink back, tried to make himself small again. "That's enough," he murmured. "Let it go." The command sergeant major shook his head once firm. "No, sir," he said, and the respect in his tone hit harder than anger ever could. "Not today." He turned slightly so the room could see Hayes clearly. "This man trained 3 command sergeant majors who served before me," he said. "He ran this installation standards program when deployments were stacked back to back and discipline broke under pressure. He wrote the enforcement guidelines you quote when you want to look official." He pointed at the wet tile by the power strip. "And when he told you the floor was dangerous, he was lecturing. He was preventing an injury that would end someone's career before it even began." The loud recruit swallowed hard and managed a cracked whisper. "Sergeant Major, I didn't know." The command sergeant major's eyes snapped to him. "That's the problem," he said. "You didn't know because you didn't care to know. You saw an old man serving food and decided he was beneath you." He paused, letting it sink in, then said, "The uniform didn't make you better than him. It made you responsible to act better than that." Hayes finally spoke again, soft but steady. "They're young," he said. "They'll learn." The command sergeant major looked at him with something like pain. "They will," he agreed. Then he turned back to the room and did something that made every soldier's chest tight. He stepped back from Hayes, snapped to attention, and rendered a salute, sharp, perfect, unflinching. For a heartbeat, nobody moved, stunned by the image of the base's senior enlisted leader saluting a cook in an apron. Then, as if pulled by gravity, every senior NCO in the room followed. First sergeants, master sergeants, platoon sergeants, salutes rising in a wave. Officers who had entered behind them snapped salutes too, faces rigid with respect. The recruits, slow to understand but quick to obey, raised their hands last, their salutes shaky, shame trembling in their wrists. Hayes stared at the wall of salutes like he didn't know where to look, eyes glistening for a second before he blinked it away. He returned the salute, slow, precise, the kind of salute that carried history, and the DFAC stayed silent like a chapel. The command sergeant major lowered his hand and spoke one final sentence that landed like a verdict. "The base is silent because discipline was broken in the loudest way, by disrespecting the man who lived it." Then he looked to the loud recruit again. "You asked if he'd teach you discipline," he said. "He already is, and he didn't raise his voice once." The power stayed off longer than anyone expected, not as punishment for hunger, but as a deliberate pause. An interruption that forced every soldier in the DFAC to sit inside the discomfort they'd created. And in that quiet, the recruits began to understand the difference between being corrected and being humbled, because correction hits the ears, but humility hits the bones. Hayes stood near the serving line with the mop handle resting against his palm, looking like he wanted nothing more than to finish cleaning and disappear back into routine, but the command sergeant major stayed beside him like a guard of honor, not letting the moment shrink back into convenience. "Sir," the command sergeant major said quietly, "I apologize." Hayes shook his head, gentle. "You didn't do it," he replied. "Don't carry their mistake." The command sergeant major's eyes narrowed. "They're mine," he said simply, "so I will." He turned to the recruits and spoke without yelling, which somehow made it worse. "Step forward," he ordered. The loud recruit stepped out first, shoulders stiff, face pale, hands trembling slightly as he tried to maintain military bearing while shame burned through him. "Say it," the command sergeant major said. The recruit swallowed hard and faced Hayes. "Sergeant Major Hayes, I'm sorry," he forced out. "I mocked you. I disrespected you. I put hands on you. I was wrong." Hayes looked at him for a long moment, not enjoying it, not crushing him, just measuring what kind of man stood there beneath the arrogance. "Why?" Hayes asked quietly. The recruit blinked, caught off guard. "Sir, why did you do it?" Hayes repeated, voice steady. The recruit's throat tightened. Because you looked like someone we could laugh at," he admitted, and the words tasted bitter as soon as they left his mouth. Hayes nodded once like he'd expected that answer. "That's honest," he said. "And it's ugly." The recruit's eyes watered, but he didn't wipe them. "Yes, Sergeant Major," he whispered. Hayes took a slow breath. "Listen," he said, "discipline isn't yelling, it isn't fear, it's the decision to do the right thing when it would be easier to do the wrong thing." He glanced at the wet floor, the napkins, the careless steps. "Today, the right thing was cleaning what you spilled, taking what you were issued, and treating people with respect even when you thought it didn't matter." He looked the recruit in the eye. "You don't owe me respect because of who I am. You owe respect because of who you're supposed to be." The recruit nodded, tears threatening now. "Yes, Sergeant Major." One by one, the other recruits stepped forward and apologized too, less dramatic, more sincere, each realizing that the man in the apron had never needed recognition to be powerful. The command sergeant major waited until the last apology ended, then nodded at the staff sergeant near the breaker. "Power on," he said. The lights over the serving line flickered back to life, machines humming, the DFAC returning to normal sound, but the room itself didn't return to normal because something had shifted in the culture in a single morning. The loud recruit stood silently, then spoke again, voice quieter than before. "Sergeant Major, can I ask you something?" Hayes hesitated. "Go ahead." The recruit swallowed. "Why are you here cooking?" Hayes's eyes softened, and for the first time his voice carried a hint of something like sadness. "Because soldiers still need to eat," he said, "and because I miss the sound of a base waking up. I miss being useful without being in charge." He paused, then added, "And maybe because I wanted to see if the army still remembered what respect looks like." That landed like a weight, and several soldiers looked away, ashamed. Hayes picked up the mop again and resumed cleaning like the moment hadn't happened, because that was who he was, steady, humble, unperformative. As the recruits filed through the line again, nobody joked, nobody grabbed extra, nobody stepped over a spill. They cleaned their own messes. They spoke quietly. They watched Hayes with a different kind of attention now, not curiosity, but gratitude. And when the command sergeant major finally turned to leave, he stopped at the door, looked back at the room full of suddenly sober soldiers, and said, "If you ever catch yourself asking, who is he to teach us? Remember this: the greatest lessons often come from the people you tried hardest to overlook." Then he walked out, and the DFAC stayed quiet, not because someone ordered silence, but because the base had learned something it couldn't unlearn.